Welcome to another edition of the Go Big or Go Home podcast with Big Rich. I am Big Rich. And you know, it's right around the corner. We've been talking about the mock drafts and everybody you hear turning around with this mock draft, that mock draft. And, you know, the draft comes up on April 23rd, starts on the 23rd anyway. And it's going to be a lot different this year because of this whole coronavirus thing. It's going to be virtual and all kinds of different stuff with that. But one thing that you always know is going to be a part of the NFL draft is analysis of the individual players and the positions. The three most prominent positions, of course, being quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. And, you know, I have my idea of what a perfect wide receiver looks like, what a perfect quarterback looks like, what the perfect running back looks like. And, of course, you're going to get those arguments. But whenever you have a team looking for that perfect guy, you know, what kind of size does he have? What's his intelligence like? How well does he control his body? How well does he run routes? Things of that nature. So, what kind of yards can he get for you after he catches the ball? Because sometimes that's as big a key as anything else. Catching the ball may not be the big issue. It may be the issue of getting the yards after the catch. Because when you have receivers that run, 8-9 yard routes, you can't get a first down on that. So today I'm painting the picture of the ideal wide receiver. If you could take all these characteristics, put them together, then that's going to be your number one wide receiver that you could possibly have with your team. And I think it's going to be, well, I know it's not possible, but I don't think it's even close to possible to get all of these categories together. And that's one of the biggest things I wanted to look at is, I think that you have to look at specific qualities because it's so difficult for a guy to be able to fit all these categories. But I definitely want to know what you think about all this. You can hit me up, gobigorgohome945@gmail.com. Go big or go home 945@gmail.com. But let's start off with the perfect size for a wide receiver. For me, the list starts and ends with Megatron, Calvin Johnson from Detroit. 6'5", 230, just an absolute stud. But if you're going to go with somebody current, what about a Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? He's got that size. He had that size in A&M. And whenever he had Ryan Tannehill throwing to him or he had Reggie McNeil or whoever was throwing to him, he had that ability to use his size to his benefit. And that to me is another huge part of you can have huge receivers. There's lots of huge receivers, but size of receivers that use the size to their benefit. And that to me, that's where that fits Mike Evans and Megatron because they're big, they're tall receivers. And yes, they're big. I mean, when you say they're 6'5", 235, that's a big man. In some terminologies, that's a grown ass man. And when you look at it from that standpoint, you have to consider a very important thing as well. You have to use your size to your benefit, not to your detriment. Because those guys can still catch balls anywhere. And they can still do things on the field that a smaller receiver can do just at 6'5" and 235. So don't mistake size for what the size is used for. Remember that. So Mike Evans and Megatron size is my ultimate receiver. You got to be smart. You got to be a smart guy to be a receiver. You have to be able to look at the defense, look at the guy across from you, and know the situation as well from the offensive end. Know what to do, know where to be at the right time. And nobody, and I mean nobody, is better at doing that than Larry Fitzgerald of the Arizona Cardinals. Even better than Jerry Rice, even better than Randy Moss or Chris Carter or somebody like that. He just knows what to do and where to be at every point in the game. And Fitz has been able to do that his whole career, which is why he's so valuable. And that's why he's put up the numbers he's put up. And why, to me, and we'll get into this in another show, to me, he's the number 2 receiver of all time behind Jerry Rice. Obviously, the list starts at Jerry Rice and goes from there. But to me, Larry Fitzgerald's right behind him. And a lot of it's because of his brain. Strength. There is a big difference between size and strength. And for me, the perfect wide receiver has the strength of a guy who's just now getting into his second year. Give me some DK Metcalf. I love me some DK Metcalf. I loved him in college. When he came out, I said he was going to be the guy. Now, I've missed on that statement a couple times in the past. I was a big Laquan Treadwell guy. We see what happened with him. That just flamed out royally. But DK Metcalf has got that strength to fight through tackles. He can get away from guys by using his strength, using his arms, using his legs to get away from guys. And that is just a huge part of that perfect wide receiver, because you don't want a guy that as soon as he gets hit, he's going down. You want a guy that's going to be able to fight through those things. And, he has a lot of these qualities that we're going to talk about today. But when you look at DK Metcalf, strength has got to be one of his biggest positive qualities. Then you move into speed. And, they always say speed kills. There are two different levels of speed as a wide receiver. You can run the 40-yard dash, and that's great. But how many wide receivers run the 40-yard dash on every play? How many wide receivers go deep on every single play? They just don't. So you've got to be able to have that fast speed in the 40, but you got to also be able to run those quick routes. So speed and quickness together is a very deadly combination. And my perfect wide receiver is going to have that exact combination. And there's two guys I look at for that. One present day and one that just recently, is starting to wrap up his career. That's Tyreek Hill and Deshaun Jackson. Those guys can both straight out burn if you need them to go on a straight pattern. But they also have the quickness that they can cut off that route, go a different direction, and still not lose any speed. And that, to me, is absolutely monstrous in your perfect wide receiver, because there are a ton of guys. There's a million guys that run fast. John Ross ran a 4.27. Can't catch a lick. There are a lot of wide receivers out there that can fly if you put them on a 40-yard dash. That's great. Perfect. Bob Hayes was the world's fastest man. Not a good wide receiver. Ronaldo Nehemiah was the world's fastest man in the 80s. Never a good receiver when he played for the 49ers. And he couldn't run a route. He could run straight. Zero question about that. He could run straight. But if you asked him to run an in or an out or a skinny post or a fly or something like that, I don't think so. So speed has two parts to it: the long distance speed and the quick burst speed. And for me, that's Tyreek Hill and Deshaun Jackson. Again, we're getting into our NFL draft perfect wide receiver. And when we look at the draft coming up on the 23rd of April, the players, and this is every year, so it's not just pertaining to this year, but these GMs and these talent evaluators always want to find the perfect guy at that position. The three main positions on any football team: wide receiver, running back, quarterback. This week we're covering wide receivers. We will be covering running backs, and we will also get into the perfect quarterback in a couple of weeks. So make sure and give me your input. Let me know, especially with some of these qualities. Let me know who you would put together as your perfect at these positions. Go big or go home 945 at gmail.com is the email address. Would love to hear from you, answer your questions in following podcasts. Then you have athleticism. And, athleticism is a tricky statement. What makes a great athlete? Well, there's a lot of stuff that makes a great athlete. Whether it's their ability to run, to jump, to catch, to use their body to their advantage. It's kind of the all-around quality, and yet you don't necessarily have to be a superstar at any one to be a great athlete, have great athleticism. Which is why when I'm talking about athleticism, the main guy I'm talking about is Julio Jones. Julio can run. He can burn with the best of them. He can run routes. He's got great hands. He's got great strength. He's got the ability to, take a hit and gain more yards. He's got the ability to do a ton of different things, which is why he's been one of the premier receivers in the league for the last 7 or 8 years. I really look at Julio Jones being that ideal athlete at the wide receiver spot. Now, again, it's taking everything into consideration. Is he as big as Mike Evans and Megatron? He's close. Is he as fast as Tyreek Hill and Deshaun Jackson? He's close. Does he have the hands of guys we're going to talk about later? He's close. Does he do things after the catch of guys that we'll talk about later? Again, he's close. So we'll get into more of these qualities, but when you look at the actual athlete itself, Julio Jones is the guy. And, I think that Matt Ryan has proven this with him over the last several years. And Julio continues to be a top 2 or 3 receiver in the league for the last 7 or 8 years. You got to have heart to be a receiver. You can't run those quick slants across the middle without having guts. You can't alligator arm those catches. You got to be able to make those catches up over your head and exposing your ribs and exposing your torso and knowing you're going to get hit and knowing you're going to get hit hard. I mean, hard. Those safeties, those corners, those linebackers are sizing you up from the second you start running that pattern, and they're going to be looking for you big time. It's just one of those situations that you have to be able to put it all together. My guy for that, and it's very, very, very easy. Hines Ward of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hines Ward never one time didn't get up after he got blasted a number of times coming across the middle to make plays. He is that guy. He is just that particular guy that no matter what happened, he was fearless, and he took some hits, man. Antonio Brown was close because he could take some hits, but he started getting a little gun shy, a little weird with doing that stuff the last year or two. But Hines Ward would pop up, and the craziest thing that he would do, which would, I'm sure, just absolutely chap the defender's hide, he'd come up smiling. Like, do it again. You think you got it? Do it again, big boy. And he didn't care. He took the hit, went back to the huddle, made the next play. Over 1,000 catches, heading to the Hall of Fame. So it's definitely a crazy situation. But when you look at these guys that can do that, I'm taking Hines Ward if I'm looking at my perfect receiver. I want him to have those kind of guts to go along with these other qualities. We mentioned Antonio Brown a little while ago. To me, nobody ran better routes than Antonio Brown. He would snap those routes off, snap those cuts, and he could run any route, any time, in any situation. Didn't matter if he was getting press covered, zone covered, whatever it was going to be. He could run those routes with precision and know that if Ben or whoever was the quarterback was going to be able to put that ball right there, he was good to go, no questions asked, and the receiver knew where the quarterback was going to be throwing it. The quarterback knew where the receiver was going to be, and that's ultimately the key. And Antonio Brown and Stephon Diggs is the same way, have that innate ability to run those routes perfectly, to precision. And it allows the quarterbacks to have a lot more faith in what's going on, just simply because you have to be able to throw in front of the receiver. You hear about people talking about throwing the receiver into the catch, and that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they would do. They would throw the receiver into the catch. Then, of course, there's always being able to adjust at the same time, where you can readjust your route and still end up in the same place. Again, quarterback knowing where the receiver is going to be. Then, of course, our perfect wide receiver has got to have perfect hands. And for me, it's 2 Houston Texans that top this list. The former Houston Texan is Andre Johnson. The more recently former Houston Texan is DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins did not drop a ball for an entire season. Let me run that past you one more time. DeAndre Hopkins did not drop a ball for an entire season. Not one. Didn't have one hit off the end of his fingers and he dropped it. Didn't have one that, slipped through his hands, or didn't have one that he had it in his hands, he got hit and dropped it. No, not one time did he drop a ball in an entire season. That's what you call reliability. And Andre Johnson was the same way. He just didn't drop it. And in a day where you've got guys dropping just dinky passes, little passes over the middle, and these guys are dropping them. D-Hop is catching balls Deshaun Watson can throw the fastball. There's no question about that. He can bring the fastball. Andre Johnson had quarterbacks thrown to him that could bring the fastball, like Matt Schaub. And they still didn't drop passes. So I need my perfect receiver to not drop the ball. It's 3rd and 9. He makes that play. It's a first down. It's not the punt unit coming out on the field, if you know what I'm saying. You cannot, under any circumstances, underestimate the hands of a wide receiver and how much of a necessity it is for a receiver to have really good hands, which is why DeAndre Hopkins, and I've said this a couple times, I think he's still going to be the best receiver in football as of the 2020 season. Yeah, you've got guys coming along, but what puts him above the Michael Thomases, the Julio Jones, is his hands. He just does not drop the ball. Body control. You see these guys. The old school answer to this question is Lynn Swann. Because Lynn Swann of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he could go up and do whatever. He was a ballet dancer. He danced with the Pittsburgh Ballet on a number of occasions. This guy had so much fluidity with his body. And you've seen the highlights. If you haven't, pull up any Lynn Swann highlights anywhere on the computer, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But Lynn Swann was the guy old school. Current day is Odell Beckham. Everybody remembers that one-handed catch he made against the Cowboys. But he makes catches like that all the time. Behind his back, down low, up high. He doesn't care, first off, where the pass is at. But secondly, he also is able to make sure that his body is under control enough that he can make sideline catches and get the toes down. He can make catches in the corner of the end zone and make sure both feet are in. He has that little sixth sense that allows him to do these things and do them very, very well, and do them just unconsciously strong throughout every game. And he'll do it multiple times a game. And it's almost gotten to the point, and you see this with different qualities in different players. It's almost gotten to the point that it's taken for granted with Odell Beckham that he's going to do those kinds of things and make those kinds of plays. I hate that it's taken for granted. However, when you do something that well for this long of a period of time, it's very difficult to not take it for granted. So, when you look at the body control, you've got Odell Beckham Jr. And then after the catch, a lot of people forget that, especially in this day and age of football with the dump passes, and, you have to look at, once you catch the ball, what do you do with it? Okay? And when you take into consideration yards after catch, okay, it's a very difficult situation because a lot of these guys, and it goes back to some of these other qualities, but it goes back to your strength to fight through tackles. It goes back to your strength and your brain. Are you able to dodge tackles? Are you able to think on your feet and get around guys? Size. Using your size to get around corners. Because if you're 6'5", 235, Mike Evans, Megatron, IE, okay, you don't have to be concerned about a corner being as big as you are or a safety being as big as you are, because it just isn't going to happen. That's just not happening. So that's why I say when you look at this, Yards after catch are huge. Julian Edelman is always up on that list. And, you have people that talk about guys like Randy Moss, T.O., but you got to go back to the greatest receiver of all time when you think about yards after catch, and that's Jerry Rice. It didn't matter if it was Joe Montana, Steve Young, who it was throwing him the ball. When those quick slants ran, and when they ran those little post patterns, that he would just get behind the linebackers, between the linebackers and the safeties, drop that ball over, and Rice was gone. There was no question about it. And Rice was not the fastest guy on the field. He wasn't the biggest guy on the field. Might have been the smartest guy on the field at that point in time. Wasn't the most athletic guy on the field. But he had that ability to make plays after the catch, which is another one of those things that's a combination of other qualities. And that's what really made Jerry Rice good, made Jerry Rice great, was that he was able to take those qualities and combine them. He was very good in a lot of these categories. Was he at the top of these categories? No. He didn't have the best hands in the world. He had very good hands. He definitely didn't have the best size. He wasn't that big of a guy. I mean, when you look at what you have today, especially, Jerry Rice was not the biggest guy in town by any stretch of the imagination. He ran a 4.71 40. A 4.71 40. I know people that wouldn't even let you into their discussion room. He was 6'2", 200 pounds. That's an average receiver right now. Average. Now you've got guys 6'5", 6'6" rolling in at wide receiver. Jerry Rice did have that ability, though, with the yards after catch to make a difference for his team, and the proof's in the pudding. 1,500 catches, 23,000 yards almost 200 touchdowns in 300 games. I mean, think about that for a minute. 5 catches a game for 300 games. About 80 yards a game for 300 games. If you're going 5 for 75, that's 15 yards a catch. And I got news for you, folks. He didn't always run 15-yard routes. He was the king at running that quick little slant. Now, he could go deep, no question about it. But he was the king of running that quick slant and turning a 5-yard pass into 15. But for his career, he averaged 15 yards a catch. So think about that for a minute. So when you look at the perfect wide receiver in the NFL, the perfect NFL wide receiver, you've got the size of Mike Evans or Calvin Johnson. You got the smarts of Larry Fitzgerald, the strength of a DK Metcalf, the speed of a Tyreek Evans or a Deshaun Jackson, the athleticism of Julio Jones, the heart of Hines Ward, the route running ability of Antonio Brown or Stephon Diggs, the hands of DeAndre Hopkins or Andre Johnson, the body control of Odell Beckham, and the innate after-catch ability of Jerry Rice. So you find the receiver that has all those things, and there you find your new greatest receiver in the league. And if you find that guy, he's a robot. He's an android, because it's just not going to happen. But when these guys that you're getting ready for the NFL draft right now, and there are a lot of receivers that are going to be coming through the NFL draft this year, there are projections that there's going to be a run in the early teens of wide receivers from a number of colleges, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all this, because you got 2 coming from Alabama, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs. Then, of course, you've got Justin Jefferson out of LSU. You've got a number of guys that are even a Denzel Mims, CeeDee Lamb. There's a number of these wide receivers that are going to go, and this is believed to be the most talented wide receiver draft coming up in the last 20 years. Okay, I could almost buy that, But what you also have to look at with that is how many are going to make a difference. How many are really honestly going to make a difference on the teams that they're playing on? How many are going to be DK Metcalf? DK Metcalf came on the scene last year and just absolutely tore things up, which is great. Can Justin Jefferson do that? Possibly. Can CeeDee Lamb do that? Possibly. Could Denzel Mims do that? Possibly. Denzel Mims out of Baylor is a very underrated, I believe, prospect in this draft. The guy is 6'3". Had the pleasure of watching him play his entire career at Baylor. And when you look at what he's got, and you think about the fact that Julian Edelman's going to be 33 this year, and look at the 4.38 40 that he ran, does he fit these categories? Most of them. I'm not saying he's spectacular in any of them. But a 6'3" target that ran 4.38, not bad. And then, of course, you've got, the touchdown scoring ability of Denzel Mims. 28 touchdowns in 3 years. That's not really anything to sneeze at. Then you got those second-level guys like Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State, or T. Higgins from Clemson, people like that. That's where you find your guys that are going to be like a Tyreek Hill. Not the biggest guy in the world, not the most flashy guy in the world coming out of college, but there's believed to be 6 wide receivers going in the first round. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. But I would almost bet you that 11, 12, 13, those 3 picks there are probably all going to be wide receiver, along with some wide receivers throughout the rest of the first round. But I have zero doubt that there will be a number of wide receivers that are going to make a difference on teams. And that's why I say you're looking for the perfect wide receiver. Well, yeah, you can look for the perfect guy. You can look for that all day. It's the ability to be able to do it that's the question. Is this guy that I'm getting ready to draft, how many boxes did he check mark? We're talking about 10 different categories here. If you don't check at least 5 of those boxes, I don't know that you should be a first-round pick. I don't know that you're going to be the guy for a team. And I understand not all wide receivers are the guy for a team. But when you get a guy, and I'll use Laquan Treadwell, who marked a lot of those boxes, but the minute he got onto an NFL field, he puckered up, and he absolutely sucked. You got to be able to perform as well. And that's where the 11th place on this list comes in, and that's where it's the clutch catch. And the clutch catch, that's where it really comes into play. If you need a catch, it's 3rd down and 10, the game's on the line, and you need a catch. And you can have receivers from all over the place. It doesn't matter where, when, early in the league, late in the league. You tell me who it's going to be. There's really 2 guys you got to look at. As far as guys that have been clutch, start to finish, and were able to make that difference and make that catch when it came down to it, not just in the huge games, but all the time. And one of them, believe it or not, and I'm not going against this because everybody knows that I can't stand this team, but one of the greatest clutch receivers of all time was Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin of the Cowboys was a tremendous clutch receiver. If you needed a catch to win a game, that was your guy to go to. There was no question about it. He could make the play, and he just had that ability to make the play. And it's a situation where he wasn't the biggest receiver. He wasn't the greatest receiver. I mean, there's arguments he's not even the greatest receiver the Cowboys have ever had. But the one thing that they did accomplish was getting the ability to catch that ball from Troy when they needed to extend a drive. And Michael was just so good at that. So good at that. He extended drives. He extended game-winning drives so often. So Michael Irvin is that clutch guy that you need, which is that 11th quality in the perfect wide receiver. So let me know what you think about what your perfect wide receiver would look like. Go big or go home, 945@gmail.com. Please feel free to use these categories and shoot it to me. Let me know who your perfect wide receiver would be in each one of these categories. It'll be real fun to compare. We'll maybe even talk about them a little bit in future broadcasts. As I mentioned, we will be getting into running back on the next podcast, and we'll get into the perfect quarterback the following podcast, so that way we can get everything leading up into the NFL draft and really kind of get into the brains of some of these GMs and talent evaluators, so that when we're seeing what they're picking, they know what they know what they're looking for. The big thing is, do we understand what they're looking for? It'll kind of help you out a little bit. Again, go big or go home, 945@gmail.com. Of course, check out our YouTube page at 945 The Beat. Until next time, it is the Go Big or Go Home podcast. My name is Big Rich. So long, everybody.